We are just about halfway through the MLB season, and it seems like the entire American League is in the wild card race still. I've got Garion Thorne on the line here to discuss some surprising fantasy standouts and some spots that need upgrading on all the AL wildcard contenders right after this. Hello and welcome everybody to the Thursday edition of the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast. Erik Halterman here with Garion Thorne, Senior Content Associate at DraftKings. Did I get that title right, Garion?
Yeah, that is the mumbo jumbo that they have assigned me with. You are correct.
Well, we will be expecting some senior level content from you today as we talk about your Blue Jays and the rest of the American League wildcard race, which, as I said in the intro, contains 2/3 of the league, something like that. I'm not sure if we'll get to all, 9 teams today, but we're going to try. But as always, I would like to start with some of the headlines before we get into the main topic. And the biggest headline in baseball yesterday was the battle of the two youngest, most exciting pitchers in the majors. Is that fair to say? Paul Skeens versus Jacob Misiorowski. I mean, we're maybe a week or two away from Chase Burns being just as exciting as both of them.
Yep.
But I was there in person. I can tell you a little bit about that in a minute. But Garion, did you manage to catch any of this game on TV?
Yeah, I mean, I was working, but I had it on. I had to make sure that I caught a little bit of this. And I mean, again, I would say that I think for a lot of people, Misiorowski was the takeaway. And I guess for a lot of people too, this is probably the first time they'd ever seen Misiorowski pitch. So it's a sight to behold. But I know it wasn't his best start, but I feel like I have to keep reminding myself to almost not take Paul Skeens for granted. He's almost entering that sort of like Felix Hernandez range for me, where maybe it's because of the team he's on, maybe it's because of the leverage that he tends to pitch in, but you know, we're just over a year into his career. So it's sad that I'm having to be like, no, remember that Paul Skeens is amazing. And, you know, some of the stats aren't as like breathtaking as they were last season, at least like from a strikeout perspective. And, you know, seems like it's almost intentional on his part to maybe get a little bit more contact, work deeper into games, et cetera, et cetera. But, you know, when your underwhelming sophomore follow-up to an amazing rookie season looks like what Paul Skeens is doing right now, I mean, I just, any chance you can get to call this guy out and say how amazing he is, I think you have to take it.
Yeah, that's very true. His ERA has risen from 1.96 last year all the way up to 2.12 this year. He fell to 4-7 with what on paper looked like a very poor start in this game. But I got to say, I'm not sure any of the Brewers hitters made any of the Pirates outfielders take a step backwards while Skeens was on the mound. The Brewers managed a 4-run second inning, but it was all bloop singles. There was a weak grounder through the hole on a hit and run. There was an error in that inning too, I believe. It did not feel like Paul Skeens pitched at all poorly. Although I guess if he's dialing down the swing and miss a little bit this year, the strikeout rate only 27% compared to 33% last year. If you're trying to get outs through contact, you're going to have a few more of these innings. Obviously, not a lot. The guy's ERA is still 2.12, but it shouldn't surprise us too much. Then on the other side, though, Jacob Misiorowski, 5 more dominant innings, only allowed 2 hits, only walked 2 in this one, 8 strikeouts. I mean, just how quickly can we move this guy up uncomfortably far on our rest of season pitcher rankings? Are you already thinking, you know, if we drafted today, Jacob Misiorowski, I'd be fine with him as my fantasy ace?
Yeah, I mean, pitchers become such a weird sort of position to quantify and to project. I mean, obviously, I hate that when you watch someone like Misiorowski pitch, your mind is immediately thinking about how long that elbow is going to last. So I think we've all seen the viral tweets of just usually it's like the 2022 major league leaders in velocity and just like crossing out which ones are getting Tommy John surgery. It's like an inevitable thing at this point. So I don't know. I feel like right now with pitchers, I tend to embrace the risk, embrace the upside, just kind of thinking that every single one has risk. So for me to look at someone with his just unlimited potential, I mean, you think about just the raw stuff and the raw velocity, but then on top of that, to have 99th percentile extension because of that 6'7" frame. I mean, some of those fastballs must feel like they're going 107, 108 miles an hour. Like, it's just mind-boggling to think about. And the other thing that's kind of like throwing me for a bit of a loop, and maybe you have an answer for me, Eric, I hope you do. I'm trying to think of maybe not a 1-to-1 comp necessarily for like his stuff, but this archetype of fantasy asset, a dominant strikeout heavy starting pitcher whose main red flag is so very obviously his just control and his walk rate. I'm trying to think of a guy that I can even sort of use as like a measuring stick. Like Gavin Williams comes to mind as like a C- version of this, where like you watch Gavin Williams on a particular night and the stuff will wow you. And you're like, why isn't this guy better? As I'm sure like all Guardians fans ask themselves every 5 days. But the walks just catch up with him. And occasionally he leaves. I mean, now he's throwing a cutter all the time. But, last night we saw it. He left a cutter middle to Vladimir Guerrero Jr. It goes 415 feet. That's the Gavin Williams story. Luis Heel is like the other guy I'm kind of thinking about. Just amazing stuff, but might not have any idea where it's going. And, as we were just talking about with Skeens, like the one way to rectify just traffic on the bases is the ability to strike out anyone you face at any given time. And that can lead to a really high strand rate and all these nice things. So, I mean, my optimism is massive. I look at a guy who could honestly have like a 12, 13% walk rate across a full season. And I don't know what to do with that. Do you?
Yeah, the guy who comes to mind for me would be maybe Hunter Green, who had elite prospect pedigree, was the second overall pick. And, his first couple of years, actually, the ERAs weren't great, but strikeout rates north of 30% with walk rates between 9 and 10%. That's actually slightly better than what Mizorowski has shown that he's capable of. But Mizorowski gets that extra tick of velocity too. But Hunter Green and Mizorowski now are guys where if you look at their log of their pitches after any given inning, and you look at them next to a inning from a typical closer, the pitches would look very much the same. There was one strikeout Mizorowski had, I believe, in the first inning, where I looked up on the board after the at-bat finished, and it was, 101, 102, 100, 101, 101. This is the guy doing that as a starter in the first inning. It was ridiculous. The crowd was crazy. It was a sellout crowd. For a random Wednesday afternoon.
Oh, nice.
The Brewers and Pirates. And, I was not the only one who was neither a Brewers nor a Pirates fan there. I counted gear from 9 different MLB organizations at that game. I thought we were going to get to 10 when I saw a Giants jersey as we were leaving, but it turned out to be a Yomiuri Giants jersey. But the whole baseball world.
Nine and a half.
Yeah, not 9.5. There was some AAA too, so maybe we get to 9 3/4. But the whole baseball world was talking about a pitching matchup between these two teams in mid or late June. That was very cool. It's not very often that we get to see a spectacle like that in baseball. I just wish the managers treated it like a spectacle. Neither guy was allowed to go even 80 pitches. I don't think that there was any hint of an injury there. I think it was just, this is a 4-run game already. Why waste any pitches from either of these guys? I mean, they're kind of both being treated with some sort of bubble wrap, I guess, at this point. So that was a little bit disappointing. But other than that, quite a spectacle. We don't often get to see a Pirates-Brewers game in June. That's this exciting. Should we move on to some other bits of news, though? There was some excitement just today in the Blue Jays Guardians game, a pair of hit by pitches for some star players. Vlad Jr. and Jose Ramirez both had to exit early. It looks like we've seen an update on Guerrero, and he's probably going to be fine. I don't know if we've seen anything.
X-rays were negative for Jose Ramirez as well. I don't know if the team came out and said anything like too definitive, but it's very odd situation where it seems like after both players initially stated and both ended up leaving with the exact same forearm contusion injury in a tit for tat sort of situation. Not the best baseball, but that did happen.
Yeah, I don't love that baseball players' preferred way of getting revenge is throwing something 95 miles per hour at another human being, but it doesn't seem like we're going to end that tradition anytime soon. Hopefully both of those guys are okay and back in
Can
the
I
lineup
say
tomorrow.
that the one thing, maybe this is the Blue Jays fan in me, but honest to God, my goal for the last month has been to try to figure out what is going on with Kevin Gausman and how you can project Kevin Gausman. Because again, he goes out and throws 8 scoreless innings today, and you think, oh, what an amazing sign of progress. But, the last 3 starts have been horrendous. The thing I took away from the Jose Ramirez hit by pitch was, oh, Gausman hit 96. That's a good sign.
Yes. Well, and maybe he hit 96 with precise control exactly where he wanted it too, unfortunately. But hope those guys are okay. We'll be talking about both of their teams in just a minute. Just wanted to wrap up one other potential news story to follow here. Wyatt Langford is out of the lineup yesterday against the Orioles with left side tightness. This is a guy who keeps battling oblique issues. Are we at the point where we're already ready to label Wyatt Langford as injury prone? And, even if this is just a brief stint on the injured list, you would penalize him in your rankings next year?
I don't know if I'd penalize him in my rankings for that. It's such an interesting time with him where I think we all sort of understood that last season was marred with the injuries, and just with the timing of all that, you kind of had to throw some of the stats out the window. And the second half numbers, or at least like the late season numbers, looked promising, and it was all setting up to be this, coming out party in his sophomore campaign. And even when he's been healthy, it's been a little just meh. Like, again, super toolsy. Like you pull up the Baseball Savant page, you're still going to be like, oh, he's got what, like a 80th percentile barrel rate. He's like mid 70s in hard hit rate, 90th percentile speeds. You're always going to kind of salivate about the 30-30 potential. But, the strikeout rate's gone up this season. That feels concerning. I don't know how much of this just to lay at the feet of the Rangers lineup and offense in general just being a disappointment. I mean, you look at just like from a counting stats perspective, I believe he only has 54 plate appearances with runners in scoring position so far this season. And his BABIP is like ridiculously low in that sample, although his strikeout rate is also pretty high, which is, again, a problem. So I don't know. Like, I think that maybe, if I'm being honest with myself, going into next season, just kind of thinking about how this usually goes for a player of this particular archetype, his ADP will fall to like, I don't know, like the 70s or the 80s, sort of that range. And I'm still someone drafting Luis Robert in that range because I can't get over the potential and just the upside. So if I honestly think if this keeps going the way it's going, I'll be buying a lot of Wyatt Langford in 2026 just because that upside is always going to get me. But I do think there's some red flags and some stuff not to like just beyond the injuries at this point, which is a little bit disappointing.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. Speaking of Luis Robert, by the way, he exited yesterday's game versus Arizona with hamstring tightness. Keep an eye on that one heading into your weekend lineups. But should we head over to the main topic of today's show, which is a look at all of the AL wildcard contenders? We're going to spend some time talking about the positive surprises on each of these teams, some unexpected sources of fantasy value, and we'll take a look at some spots these teams might need to upgrade at the deadline, which would mean any of the, just volume guys who are useful for deeper leagues at those spots could see their fantasy value crater in about a month. And let's start with your Blue Jays, even though they are currently the second wild card team at the moment. I've got a few positive surprises on this team. Should we start with Bo Bichette, who maybe isn't a surprise for everybody, but as a Bo Bichette skeptic, I think I have to say I've been more or less wrong with how this one has turned out so far. I'm not necessarily back to peak Bo Bichette form, but hitting 272 with 11 homers, just 4 steals. But this is basically Bo Bichette back to being 95% of himself, would you say?
He's such an interesting fantasy asset because I think we still use some of his better earlier on seasons as that measuring stick where, what was it, 20? I think it was 25 stolen bases he had the one time.
Yep.
I always like to pick, well, I don't like to, but I feel like I always end up sort of identifying a secret slow person on my favorite baseball team. In the past couple years, that was Lourdes Gurriel, who was a lot slower than people thought he was. Bo Bichette, super slow. And I don't know if that's a product of him maybe scaling it back a little bit after the soft tissue injuries we saw last season. But his sprint speed is, I believe it's just in like, if it's in the 20th percentile, it's just above that.
Yeah, 23rd at the moment. So
okay.
Yeah, very low. Bottom quarter, and he's a shortstop.
Yeah. And it just seems like that part of his game is gone. So now you're already dealing with someone who is, at best, a 4-category player in standard leagues. He's never going to be like a 30 home run guy. He's tied for the team lead right now in home runs, but best case scenario, he's on pace for about his career average there. Let's say that, like 22 to 25. The problem is what you really need from Bichette as a leadoff hitter is to score a lot of runs. I would say he's been driving in more runs than you would expect from someone in that particular slot in the lineup. But he's someone who I really feel like if you're a Bo Bichette owner, you're banking on elite batting average. So the fact that he's he's back and he's been pretty good. I don't want to knock him too much, but I think he kind of needs to be a 300 hitter if he's someone who you're counting on in fantasy. 270 is not bad, but it's just not going to cut it for what he doesn't give you elsewhere, right?
Yeah, I think we've got him as the, what is this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11th best fantasy shortstop at the moment. So that's something. You can make do with that, but not looking like he's returning to fantasy stardom in any way. But I guess I would say there's no real clear red flags that are saying he's about to collapse. As long as he stays healthy, he should at least be that guy for you. I want to ask about another Blue Jays infielder, though, Ernie Clement, who surprisingly hitting .303 so far this season. Only 4 homers and 3 steals, but a high batting average with quite a lot of playing time. That has fantasy value, certainly in deeper leagues, maybe even in medium-sized leagues. But we're going to talk about some spots that need upgrading, and I certainly would have guessed that this was one of the spots, just seeing who's on the depth chart at third base. But is Ernie Clement for real? Is he going to hold on to this job through the deadline and be a pretty useful deeper league fantasy player?
I mean, they really seem to like him. And he's someone who, we don't often talk about defensive value as it pertains to fantasy, but in this situation, how good he is as a fielder is very relevant because he's just going to be in the lineup. He's even been playing like he's their backup first baseman, which is wild. I believe in a format where you only need 5 games at a position. I would assume he's first base, second base, third base, not outfield. Is he shortstop eligible at this point? I think he's playing up there too.
I see 9 games that he's appeared at shortstop as well. So
yeah, but so the thing with Clement, despite being very fast, if you just were to look at like his sprint speed and that sort of profile, I guess the Jays as a team just don't steal a lot of bases. It's unfortunate. You'd like more in that particular category. He is someone who has always had like a preternatural ability to make contact. So that's when you're looking in terms of batting average and projecting forward, I do think that's a very positive sign. However, he's got such interesting splits this season. He is, I don't even want to say he's been amazing against left-handed pitching. I believe among qualified hitters, he has the highest batting average against left-handed pitchers in all of baseball. And his WRC plus against right-handed pitchers is about 52, 51, somewhere in that range.
He's got it up to 58. Congrats to him.
Good for Ernie Clement. So I don't know. To me, this is a situation where once Dalton Varsho gets healthy, if he gets healthy, it seems like it's a week or 2 away. Suddenly you've got Varsho in the outfield. Anthony Santander would hopefully also be back at some point. George Springer's still out there, but taking DH at bats. the issue when the Jays start getting a bunch of outfielders back is suddenly Addison Barger can't live in right field when they're facing a right-handed pitcher. I just really think if this team is healthy and firing at all cylinders, Ernie Clement's not playing against right-handed pitching. And I think they'll get to that point if everyone gets healthy again. So I think he's a useful, like Santander might not be back for a month. So he's a useful piece in the intermediate, but I wouldn't be banking on him long-term or hoping he's going to help you out in the playoffs too much in a head-to-head league. I just feel like it's a little bit of an aberration, despite the fact that he does have a great contact ability in his toolbox.
Let's talk about one more Blue Jay with great contact ability, Alejandro Kirk. For the last several years, he's made a lot of contact and generally hit about 250. This year, he's making a lot of contact and is hitting 310. Is this just a BABIP swing, or is this a breakthrough to Alejandro Kirk being the guy he always should have been? Do you see him as somebody who you can reliably roster in even a one-catcher fantasy league for the rest of the season?
I think so. I really liked Kirk coming into this season. And this is like a take I'm workshopping, I'll be honest. But it's one I think about a lot when I watch like Francisco Alvarez and sort of his career path right now with the Mets, or even to an extent Adley Rutschman. I think the transition from catching in the minors to the transition to catching in the majors and their level of responsibility and the toll it takes on your body and how long the season is, I think there's just going to be this transitional period. Like we've seen with all three of those guys, each highly touted prospects in their own right. I mean, Kirk was called up directly from high A, so I don't think he ever had the chance to sort of like matriculate up the Baseball America kind of a prospect list like he would have. But immediate success at the major league level as a hitter. I mean, it's so funny to think about now because Kirk is one of the best defensive catchers in baseball. He was a bat first, maybe this guy stays at catcher prospect. And he won a Silver Slugger. So there's a sample size of success here, of actual success. I just think the toll this takes on your body, I think this is something that at least I'm noticing a little bit more and more with these offensive catchers that we think are going to be these set in stone guys. I just think it takes a couple seasons, and I think Kirk he's gotten through the woods in a way. Like I don't know if he's going to be able to sustain exactly this level of hard hit rate, but I think if you qualify it around the start of May, it's like he and Aaron Judge have the hardest hit rates in baseball, which at the end of the day, like if I'm looking for some sort of evidence that this is real, that's a pretty good place to start.
Yeah, 56.5% hard hit rate on the season for Alejandro Kirk. That is excellent for a catcher. That's excellent for anybody. Should we talk about any other Blue Jays who have been unexpectedly good that you think people outside of Toronto might not be paying enough attention to, or do you want to move on to some of this team's holes?
I feel like everyone's picked up Barger at this point, so I think I think that about covers it.
All right, Addison Barger also for real, but let's talk about what the Blue Jays might do at the deadline. At this point, it seems pretty likely that they're going to be buyers. I mean, barring an incredible losing streak over the next 2 weeks, the Jays currently are safe by a couple games in the wild card. So at worst, they're going to be a couple games out of it 2 or 3 weeks from now. Where do you think Toronto will be trying to invest at the deadline?
I think it's starting pitching, and I think that's going to be the answer for a couple teams we talk about here. So
Yes.
they might be competing amongst themselves. It is a bit of an interesting situation what they've sort of created for themselves. Obviously and there's another team we'll talk about that's also done this, but they've sort of created a very dependable pitching staff, or rotation at the very least, for 3 guys. Gausman just seems to make every single start. Barrios, that's his number one skill, is availability. And Chris Bassett, despite his sort of advanced age, also just tends to make every single start. All 3 have been performing like a fringy top 50 pitcher in redraft formats. Like none have been great. Gausman's strikeout rate hasn't come back like some would hope. Bassett's been actually outperforming, I would say, his expectation for strikeout rate. I don't know how much that can sustain, but and Barrios is outperforming his expected statistics for the 17th consecutive season. But the big question is Max Scherzer going to be able to stay healthy? And I think he's an interesting fantasy case in and of itself. I mean, obviously he's Max Scherzer. We saw him come back on Wednesday, throw 5 innings. I believe he maxed out at 95.2 miles per hour, which is encouraging. The whiffs weren't there, but at the same time, the Guardians ran out a lineup with so many left-handed batters and switch hitters. I think there were only 2 right-handed bats in that lineup that Scherzer faced. And he only threw his slider like 3 times. So I do think once that slider usage ticks up in a more neutral setting, we'll probably start to see some of those whiffs come back, even as he just finds himself. I know his last start in AAA, he had racked up a bunch of strikeouts. So that'll be an interesting one. But beyond that, they have a giant question mark. I mean, Eric Lauer has been surprisingly good.
Yeah. Is he an all capitals beast, like Uncle Ted is saying in the chat here, or is that a little bit overstating it?
Probably overstating it. I will say he is someone who his strikeout rate has been better than it used to be, even in those like good seasons in Milwaukee. So that's encouraging if you're looking for just like a reason why this is happening. But his BABIP is ridiculously low. It just feels like a bit of an aberration. We'll kind of see what happens. But the Jays then have sort of this weird, I don't think they're counting on any of these guys, but like Alek Manoah threw 25 pitches in a bullpen recently. He's August, maybe. And then they've been very aggressive with Trey Savage. I think part of the reason for his start in low A was weather. They just would rather him play in Florida than play in Vancouver or New Hampshire or Buffalo in April. But he had a really good start last night. I think his 3rd start in AA with the Fisher Cats. We've seen his sort of cohorts at the college level. I mean, sort of famously had that duel with Chase Burns, and I think there's a chance that he could even be part of this equation towards the end. So I don't know if they're going to necessarily trade for someone who would have fantasy value, but that is the one area I would see them making a move.
Yeah, it's interesting because, like you said, there are options there. If they trade for another guy who's just a guy, that's not necessarily a major upgrade. I mean, he has to be better than Eric Lauer on a hot streak. So you'd have to trade for, a real pitcher who's at least a proven number 3 or so to make it worth it. But you could definitely see the motivation for it. Spencer Turnbull also kicking around there, but it seems like he hasn't recaptured the.
He got DFA'd yesterday. That was the end of the Spencer. I believe he and Jose Urena signed on the exact same day, both DFA'd within about 6 weeks.
Yeah, I wondered if he might be a sneaky signing there. Turns out the answer is no. Guess we had a random rebound for 1/2 season with the Phillies last year. Then he got hurt, and he doesn't have it anymore, unfortunately. But we've got a whole bunch of other AL wildcard contenders to talk to. I know you could talk Blue Jays for the rest of the show, but we'll get to those right after this quick message from the NFFC. The NFFC RotoWire Fantasy Football Online Championship is live. Play fantasy football against your favorite RotoWire experts on NFFC this football season. Jeff Erickson, Nick Whalen, and more will compete in the RotoWire NFFC Online Championship for a shot at $250,000. Sign up for a draft today at rotowire.com/high stakes. That's rotowire.com/high stakes. Garion, I'm not sure if the Toronto Argonauts are included in that competition or not. I don't know if high stakes fantasy football has reached the CFL.
Maybe we need some sort of contest set up like they're doing. What is the Club World Cup is happening right now, where like MLS teams are playing Premier League teams. Like something like that could maybe figure that out. Get some Argonauts versus Kansas City Chiefs going, and we can figure out a way to make the FCC talk about that.
Yeah, I'm sure that would go over quite well. Let's get a preseason tournament with the college champions and the CFL champions. That would be fun for maybe a game or two. But should we move on to the rest of the AL wildcard picture, including the team that is currently leading the AL wildcard race and is actually within a game of the lead in the AL East? Mm-hmm. Is it now? It is half a game.
Yeah, they won today.
Rays are behind the Yankees. So are the Rays maybe not even belonging in this picture? Do you see the Rays as a legitimate threat to the New York Yankees? I mean, we have to say they probably are, given the way that they've played them to nearly a draw so far. I don't think many would have said that this roster has the talent necessarily to win the division, but it's also the Rays, and a decent Rays team can win a division in any given year.
Yep.
How real do you think this team is?
So there's a couple caveats that I would have to what I will admit is a very healthy and has always been healthy fear of the Tampa Bay Rays. It really seemed like in April that Shane McClanahan was going to show up at some point, and now it feels like that's just not going to happen, which is a massive blow to not only the Rays, but to people like myself who had been reserving an IL spot with Shane McClanahan for an extended period of time.
He did just resume mound work.
Okay.
But I would agree.
I just don't want to. I don't want to get hurt again. You know.
Yeah, that's very fair.
And I think the other thing that's interesting is the way that, or just something to remember, I guess, is the way that MLB augmented their schedule, where they had so many home games to begin the season to try to get them out of that like real swampy Florida July and August. They're going to have a ton of road games. Now they've performed well on the road, so I don't know if that's necessarily a negative. Like they just swept the Royals in Kansas City, but they have had a lopsided schedule that has leaned towards home games.
Yeah, so home games compared to 31 on the road so far.
Yeah. So if there is a reason to look at their record and go, maybe that can't sustain other than your basic Rays devil magic, that would maybe be the one I would circle. Just that there's a lot of road games coming up. So whether or not they can kind of find their way through that is pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's a good point. We've got a question in the chat here. Is the backloaded away schedule going to be good for Pepio, or we can really generalize that to all of the Rays pitchers? Is that maybe we could spin that as a positive? Granted, they'll all be away games, which away games at good parks are nice. You'd rather have home games at good parks, but maybe there's something to be said there. Should we be slightly high on all of the Rays pitchers and slightly low on all their hitters, given that lopsided schedule going forward?
I mean, it's something to consider. I feel like that is, I know even for like DFS purposes, that's obviously one of those things you look at a lot when it comes to the Rays starters. And, Shane Baz had a great start today, a really, really encouraging start. And I know he kind of flip flops almost regardless of the location of his starts at this point. But another guy who the home run ball in particular, I know Pepio's kind of looked better in general. I feel like once he got out of April, like he's been pitching better, I would say, at George M. Steinbrenner Field as of late, but those home run splits are really eye-opening. So I would say outside of the general rule of thumb for anyone aside from Rockies pitchers, I do like that for like the Rays starters going forward. That's a nice break for them.
Yeah, as far as some positives, surprises on this Rays team, I think Drew Rasmussen probably stands out most to me, although to be fair, do you know the last time Drew Rasmussen had an ERA above 3?
Yeah, it's been a while. Probably back in his Brewers days, right?
Yep, his rookie season in 2020. His ERA since then, 284, 284, 262, 283, and now 245. His, ERA estimators weren't necessarily always that low, but maybe I should have believed way more. I was just so scared of a guy coming off of this many arm surgeries. Would you have faith in Drew Rasmussen in the second half from a workload perspective? Is he going to get Garrett crocheted and only make 4 inning starts from here on out? Because if not, he's one of the best fantasy options out there, especially with that road heavy schedule.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny though that you bring it up. I mean, I believe did he start? He started last night, right? Or was it Tuesday?
Yesterday, yep. And went 5 innings, 2 hits,
and went 5 innings
runs.
despite a very good start, despite a low pitch count. And this is something we've seen pretty consistently from him this season. And this is around the time I think I remember looking at his numbers about a month ago, and thinking, okay, the ramp up is coming. Like they've been building up, they've been very careful. Now we're going to start to see Rasmussen reach that 100 pitch plateau. Maybe not every game, but occasionally. And it just has not happened yet. And look, are they maybe saving some bullets? It's very possible. Is there a set in stone pitch limit or pitch inning limit that we don't know about that they have in mind that they're kind of hoping to backload? Possible. But it's a major concern. And he's already somebody who the strikeouts aren't quite where they were prior to these injuries. And that's already going to kind of tank your fantasy value, even if you are putting up these incredible ratios. So the fact that we can't count on him to even occasionally pitch into the 6th inning or the 7th, God forbid, it makes it a little tough. But from a real life perspective, he's been incredible, and I don't think anyone could have possibly expected the results we've been getting from G. Rasmussen. It's been found money for the Rays.
Yeah, on the offensive side, I don't think anyone could have expected the results we were seeing from Jonathan Aranda. Certainly had his fans as, a deep sleeper who was going to fill a platoon role and be better than you thought, but he's been a lot better than I think anyone thought, hitting .329 after today's games. Got that OPS just south of 900. Not big power, only 8 homers, and the strikeout rate actually at 24%. That's slightly worse than average. Massive BABIP here, 425. Is that the story with Jonathan Aranda? Is he actually just fine and getting really lucky?
I think it's part of it. I will say Aranda, I sort of had in like this tier in my mind coming into the season with Tyler Soderstrom, and Soderstrom's been less and less of a win the last couple of months, but April, I really thought I'd nailed both these guys. The thing that's been a little encouraging lately for Aranda, I would say, is that he's actually had reasonable success against left-handed pitching, and they've really been trying to make him an everyday player, which is not something the Rays often do. And that might be part of a bigger sort of issue, and when we talk about like what this team needs going forward. But I would say it's one of those like positive and negative developments where I'm glad that he's done well enough as a right-handed or left-handed platoon bat that he's now getting these opportunities, because that can only help your counting stats. But I think that BABIP is really showing up in his numbers against lefties because his ISO is non-existent left on left. So it feels like it's been a lot of seeing eye singles, a lot of bloops. And if that stops at a certain point, not only is that going to start tanking some of these ratios, but it's probably going to tank this foray that he's had into being an everyday player.
Yeah, an 0.53 ISO against lefties this season. He has 3 doubles, and that's it as far as extra base hits. But should we move on to the spots that the Rays might need to upgrade? And man, the Rays are always tough to figure out at the deadline. I wouldn't be surprised if they sell and buy at the same time and end up upgrading a spot that's already filled by, Brandon Lau or something like that, who's having a great season. Is it even worth trying to predict what the Rays are going to do?
You're right. If Brandon Lau gets traded 2 days before the deadline and the Rays are 15 games above 500, I wouldn't be shocked. It's just what this organization does. I feel like let's say in a vacuum, if there was one thing this team needs, it's just a right-handed platoon bat. It's a right-handed outfielder, let's say in particular. That was supposed to be Christopher Morel, and he has just not been producing. And if anything, the little he has produced has been on right situations. He's been, I think, a 71 WRC plus this season against lefties. And when this has gotten a little bit better, I believe the Rays have the best WRC plus in baseball in the month of June. So everything's just on its way up. But there was a point in late May when the Rays had like a 120 WRC plus against right-handed pitchers and like a 75 WRC plus against southpaws. And it's just so weird because there is no franchise, there is no manager who does a better job at managing and exploiting platoons than Kevin Cash. And it just seemed like, yes, part of this is Brandon Lau's having a great season, Jonathan Aranda's having an amazing season, but they just didn't have the right-handed complement to those guys. So that feels like the thing to me that is just the most obvious thing that's going to happen here is somehow the Rays will get just a bench player on another team or some sort of AAA bat from somebody else that rakes against left-handed pitching down the stretch.
Yeah, I think that sounds right to me. So we could see a loss, perhaps, of those at-bats against lefties for Aranda if he also has a little bit of a slump and looks like they can't play him every day anymore. They'll also be getting, theoretically, Ha-Seong Kim back.
Yeah.
He is resuming his rehab assignment, dealing with shoulder and now hamstring issues, but that'll be a nice deadline addition for them. Let's move, though, to the third team, which currently occupies a wild card spot, the Seattle Mariners. Sitting one game safe right now over the Cleveland Guardians, who are currently the 7th seed. As far as positive surprises on this Mariners team, it almost feels like Cal Raleigh is single-handedly making up for, all the injuries to the pitching staff. I don't know if there's a whole lot else that's gone significantly better than expected in Seattle, but, when you've got a catcher who's on pace for, 10 wins this season or something like that, it's going to cover over a lot of gaps. Cal Raleigh, what else is there to say about this guy? I mean, is he going to keep up anything close to this? Do you buy into the talk of him as a legitimate MVP candidate?
I do. I think that, again, as we sort of just talked about, like the physical demand of the catching position, I think is almost improperly quantified by WAR. It's such a different animal. It's like, again, the amount you just have to care about your other teammates and the amount you have to study opposing lineups and be with your pitchers. And, hey, we brought up 2 new relievers today. You have to go talk to them and figure out what they throw. Like, this is stuff that Aaron Judge does not have to do. So I don't know, like, who knows? Maybe it's just like voter fatigue at this point for me. And I don't want to make Yankees fans mad. Judge is obviously having like a historically great season, but, the Raleigh stuff's amazing. I would say if you're someone who owns Raleigh or if you're a Yankee fan praying for his demise, the area I'm concerned about is just the batting average. And I think that's, for most people, that's what they would circle. Obviously, you'd like to see something like, oh my God, like his hard hit rate, his barrel rate, and they're amazing. Don't get me wrong, but they were already amazing. Like he was already a high barrel rate guy, a high hard contact rate guy. It seems like this is just the perfect storm of he's cut his strikeout rate down from like 30% to 25%, which is great. And his home run to fly ball ratio has gone from like 15 to 30. So it's not like his average is up because of seeing eye singles. It's up because he's just hitting home runs. Yeah. So those things probably regress a little bit. He's probably like a 240 hitter down the stretch if I had to like put a number on it. But again, when you look under the hood and just see like where he ranks in some of those like expected statistics, I don't think there's any reason to assume that he's not going to finish with 50 home runs.
Yeah, he'd only need 18 more to get there. Looking at his BABIP, it's actually just 282, but that's because, as you're saying, not many of his BABs are staying IP at the moment. Home runs.
I mean, he's like an extreme fly ball hitter. Like he's, there are a few seeing eye singles because there are a few balls just hit on the ground, period.
Right. Well, a remarkable start for him. As you said, though, the expected batting average, 256. So that is much lower than his 277 so far. Much better than his career batting average, which was in the 2 teens heading into this season. So it's an improvement. It's also some good luck, but that always is what happens when you see a guy having a remarkable half season like this. It's some of both. But should we talk about some of the spots that the Mariners might need to upgrade? Because I would expect this team to be a buyer, given the way their season is going. Yet there's a lot of spots on this roster that I would say they don't really have a reliable everyday guy there. I mean, we could talk first base, second base, third base, right field. Pitching staff is probably okay if with health, but man, a lot of the spots in this lineup, they could use another hitter.
They've got like a lot of freedom. Let's use a optimistic term. They have a lot of freedom to get creative with how they want to improve this lineup, which I feel like if you're a Mariners fan, you've been like yelling into a void for 6 years. Like, please supplement this amazing pitching staff with any amount of bats that aren't Justin Turner at 42 years old. I think like it was earlier this week that Rowdy Tellez was maybe he was designated for assignment last week and he like officially cleared waivers this week, but Tellez is gone. So I don't want to say this is like their obvious, we're going to keep doing this plan A going forward. But in the last week, their plan at first base has been Donovan Solano, which that's not a plan. Like he is a platoon hitter with a capital P and maybe even a capital L too. Like we know what Donovan Solano is. And even if you don't want to play like this archetype game with me, for DH and first base, like you really need to maximize power potential in a lineup. And, he's someone who's had an isolated power below 110, I think 3 of the past 4 seasons. He's just not that guy. So I would say that's probably like the number one area. And that could be really interesting if they get into a situation like, let's say Ryan O'Hearn is that guy. It would be probably a downgrade for O'Hearn, just with the horrors of T-Mobile Park and the batter's eye, as we hear about all the time. But like that's kind of the guy I think in an ideal situation that ends up on the Mariners.
Yeah. Yeah, we see a call for Eugenio Suarez to go back to Seattle. That would be bad for him, but it would probably be quite good for the Mariners. But yeah, if you're sitting on Donovan Solano or Cole Young or Ben Williamson in a deeper league, well, you're not getting a ton from any of them right now, and there's a chance you get even less after the deadline. Should we jump to some of the teams that are currently just outside the race, starting with the Cleveland Guardians, who after their loss today, I believe they have fallen to 1 game back. And man, when I look at this roster, I do not understand how the Cleveland Guardians are just 1 game back. I don't see really what the positive surprises have been on this team. I mean, Daniel Schneeman's been okay?
Yeah.
Who on this Guardians roster is doing something that they weren't supposed to do? Why is this team in the race?
I don't know. I feel like there's an AL Central team every year that just breaks my brain. And this is kind of it. I mean, I guess Luis Ortiz has been okay, and they got him in that trade, that like weird, not a 3-team trade, but really was a 3-team trade. He's been fine, but I mentioned this earlier, like Gavin Williams, I would say has been a disappointment. I think he's been a little better lately. Even Tanner Bybee has been fine. I wouldn't say he's been amazing. And, they lose a little depth with some of the recent injuries to their rotation. So I don't know. I mean, again, this is kudos to Jose Ramirez, who continues to just Atlas with the world on his shoulders. Like I don't know how he continues to prop up this lineup, because you even look at some of the chances they've taken. Stephen Kwan's been good too. I don't want to leave out Stephen Kwan, but Bo Naylor hasn't progressed offensively like we hoped he would. And again, that bar is so low when we're talking about catchers. Like, and it seemed like he had such power potential. Carlos Santana has been Carlos Santana. He's been fine. In a deeper format, corner infield possibility every single time. But like Nolan Jones, I don't think many people had like a lot of hope after what happened last season and then him leaving Coors. But, that's someone who's at least put up a very interesting fantasy season in the last 2 years, and a little bit better in June, but overall terrible. Yeah, it's just, John Kenzie Noel down to AAA, like any sort of sleeper, quote unquote, that you thought you had on the Guardians this season has just not worked out.
Yeah, I would say that's true. So that means as far as potential upgrades, there's a whole bunch of spots they could do it. Not necessarily an organization that tends to buy big or run high payrolls or really go all out at any point, though. So I'm not confident that they would do that this year, even if they are, right in the race like they are now. Is their deadline just going to be, as mentioned here, Chase DeLauder gets called up and Shane Bieber gets healthy? I mean, is that all that's going to happen here?
That's probably their best case scenario. I think Bieber's probably out for the season at this point. I think he had a setback recently, but
he has started playing catch and throwing the bullpen. So it's again, as with your Shane McClanahan pessimism, are you going to turn it around based on one positive news update in the
maybe
last 24
I don't know
hours? Maybe.
Yeah, I think too, the thing with the Guardians that is worth thinking about here is, generally speaking, the AL Central, at least the last like half decade, when you have these teams all clustered around 500, yes, they're in a wild, the wild card and the expansion of the playoffs changes everything. But it used to be like the Guardians would come into a deadline a game below 500, but 2.5 games back in the division. Like there is no chance any of these teams are catching the Tigers at this point. So I do feel like that sort of could work towards, I was going to say against the front offices, but probably towards the front office's wants, where now they don't have to go out and spend any money because they can be like, hey, we're 15 games behind the Tigers. Like, why would we do this?
Yeah, that's fair. Well, a team that's half a game behind the Guardians, shockingly, is sitting at 500 right now, is the Los Angeles Angels. Did you have the Angels being still in the race at the halfway point? I certainly didn't.
I did not. And it's funny because it would feel different if they were like hovering around 500 all season and they were a little like pesky and you were kind of noticing them, but they had that Trout injury and then they lost like, I don't know, 10 of 13 or something like that. And they were 7-8 games below 500. And immediately my mind just stopped focusing on the Angels at all. But no, they remind me a little bit of, speaking of AL Central teams, like the Bomba Squad Twins. That's like the vibe I'm getting, at least in terms of like what's good about them. They just hit dongs. They grip it and rip it. They try to hit home runs. And really everything that's happened when Mike Trout's been available the last 3 seasons, where it's like his strikeout rate's way up, but he's still hitting for amazing power. The whole team just decided to do that. That's their offensive philosophy in a nutshell at this point. And I guess Joe Adell is kind of like the other best version of that.
Yeah, the Angels are tied for third in homers with the Chicago Cubs, who've had an incredible offense this year. The top 2 teams, the Dodgers and Yankees. So pretty incredible company for the Angels to be in. Funnily enough, the Dodgers and Yankees both have a WRC plus of 120 or better, and the Angels sit at 93.
Yeah,
they've actually been the 7th worst offense in the league, despite, again, tying for the 3rd most homers. So there's been real power from Joe Adell, despite a 306 on base percentage. There's been even more power from Taylor Ward, despite a 278 on base percentage. Logan O'Hoppe, with his 267 OBP, has 17 homers as well. You might remember Kyron Paris. He had that power and also had a 266 OBP. So it is, as you mentioned, the entire team philosophy.
Except Nolan Schanuel.
True.
Everyone Nolan but him. He will not hit home runs.
Right. Their first baseman is the only guy who's not a power hitter. What a weird team. Only 6 homers for him. But are you buying Nolan Schanuel as, a reasonable enough fantasy asset at this point, assuming you have power other places? The batting average 274, pretty solid and just steady everyday playing time from a guy who's still just 23 years old.
Yeah, and some of the like the expected numbers are a little up. Like these aren't. I'm not going to drop a bunch of like. This isn't a red bar player on Baseball Savant by any means, but like his expected slugging's up, his hard hit rate is up, his barrel rate is up. They're not amazing situations, but like it's promising, and I think he's obviously got pedigree, former 1st round pick. We know what the Angels do with 1st round picks, so you could almost say like the last 2 years have been his time in the minors. I think he could be like a very nice like 2-cat specific kind of player if you need like runs and batting average. I like, because again, someone's got to be on base for some of these home runs that the Angels hit so many of. And Schanuel's at least that type of player, one of very few types of that player that they have. I mean, it's a weird team. It's so strange. Like I looked this up before I came on because I wanted to make sure it was still true. They have only had 5 guys start a game this season. They have not had any injuries. So the thing, like, if we're talking about like what they might do, like, again, we go back to teams, every team needs starting pitching in a certain way, but like, they went out and signed your man, Kyle Hendricks, to a contract where I think everyone involved was like, we know what's happening here. Kyle Hendricks is being brought into a bad Angels team because we just need someone to take the mound every 5 days. You just need to eat innings. And suddenly, like, it's him and like Jack Kokonowitz, and they're like important and they're pitching in big games, and you don't want that.
Yeah, so if this Angels team is somehow still in the race, they're going to add pitching. I think Yusei Kikuchi and Jose Soriano look actually pretty good. Things looked pretty bad for Kikuchi early in the year, but he's really been on a great run lately. Just struck out 12 last night. His ERA is down to 2.79. The whip still bad at 137, but it was sitting around, I think, 160 not too long ago. So they have two starters there. If they do add at the deadline, which I still would be surprised, probably somebody like a Jack Kokanowitz is heading to the bullpen. I guess Tyler Anderson and Kyle Hendricks eating innings from those final two spots will be the path. I think that would be, if anything, the only add. I mean, I think the offense, they seem happy with their style of offense these days. I don't know if many of these guys are actually at risk of losing playing time. I would still think it's more likely this team falls out of it and becomes sellers, though.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the only thing I would say about the Angels from a fantasy perspective is if you're someone who's still riding like the Joe Adele roller coaster and you're not quite sure like what to believe at this point, I'm kind of cautiously optimistic. Now, I will give the caveat that I have been duped into Joe Adele many times. He's one of those players. I mentioned Luis Robert earlier. I'm a Byron Buxton guy. Finally worked out this season. Like there is an archetype of player that I will allow myself to get tricked by over and over and over again. But you look at, we mentioned Addison Barger earlier. I mean, those guys with just the incredible swing speed where you're like, I know there's a lot of swing and miss here. And I mean, to Adele's credit, he's lessened his strikeout rate a little bit. Not hard. He had one of the worst strikeout rates in all of baseball. But 99th percentile in that swing speed. Like, he's so toolsy. And he's still relatively young. I think this could actually, I don't want to say it's like a true breakout, but I think this is like a mini breakout. I think he is who he is right now. If he's going to get everyday playing time, which I think he's played enough, he's played well enough at this point to get that. I think he's just going to be someone who hits 30 home runs. So there's certainly value in that. It's all about what your expectations are at this point with Joe Adele. Like he's not going to be a 5-cat stud, but I think this power is like legit.
Yeah, I would say that looks true to me. The Angels also, for whatever reason, have stopped running this year. It was a thing last year that any Angel was going to get you 15, 20 steals. Joe Adele, one of them, he went 15 for 25 on the base pass. He's just 3 for 3 this year, with the Angels tied for the second fewest steals. I would imagine that's not something they're going to change.
Well, it doesn't matter if you've stolen second. You're not going to score for the Angels in an inning, or you're going to score from first, second, or third by walking the bases on the home run. They only score with home runs. So
yeah, no real need to take that extra base. That makes a lot of sense. Should we move on to the Texas Rangers, who are in the 9 seed right now, 2 games out of the final wild card spot? Not much is working on the offensive side. On the pitching side, Jacob deGrom looking kind of like himself, at least from an ERA and whip perspective, even if all the strikeouts aren't there. That's certainly helping. On the offensive side, though, the only really hidden fantasy gem that's emerged is Josh Smith. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think so. You look at this lineup, and it's funny when you're kind of like, oh, what does this team need? They need like a first base DH type. Man, they could really use like a Jake Berger or a Jock Peterson. Yeah. That would really help fill out this lineup. Their offensive profile. We talked about that a little bit when we were talking about Wyatt Langford. Like, just in general, they've been just a cesspool when it comes to environment for counting stats this season. Corey Seager's like finally showing some signs of life, coming off like the soft tissue stuff. So that's positive. Marcus Semien has been, I mean, I'll say a lot better, but again, not hard to be a lot better than what he was the first 2 months of the season. Same with Adolis Garcia. So there's reason to think that this could keep getting slightly better. I mean, I was very high on the Rangers coming into this season. They were one of like my favorite World Series picks. So maybe I've still got some leftover optimism there, but someone like Josh Smith, who seems like he's just now going to hit leadoff for this team. I think there's a lot of potential here to be a great fantasy player. And again, he's someone who, like, Ernie Clement, who we've talked about already, just positional versatility coming out the wazoo. Like he plays everywhere.
Yeah, and he does it with 7 homers and 8 steals so far too, which is more than Ernie Clement in both of those. So a surprisingly reasonable end of the roster type of fantasy player. If the Rangers do add at the deadline, if they are in the race still, is it going to be in the bullpen, I would imagine? I mean, they've got Robert Garcia or maybe still Luke Jackson as options in the 9th inning. I mean, Garcia hasn't actually been that bad, but if this team is serious about contending, do you think they're adding a proven closer?
Yeah, I think this could definitely be one of those situations where I guess unless they're adding like a premium setup man or something along those lines, I mean, it's a pretty low bar to clear for them right now. But this is one of those situations where, especially if you're in like an AL only league and need saves, like you've got the Rangers circled. You're looking to see what happens in this bullpen because there is the potential for someone new to come in and immediately take on this role. Where again, for a team that is for a team without a closer, they do have a certain amount of upside still in terms of actually winning games and having save opportunities. So yeah, I think definitely for them on the pitching side, back end of the bullpen, hitting side, I guess both Berger and Peterson are going to be back at some point. But right now you've got like Sam Haggerty taking DH at bats. Like that is maybe worse than the Donovan Solano playing full-time first base for the Mariners situation. Like that's just a level of, we can't be doing this and calling ourselves a wild card contender.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting to see if they just assume that the players they already added are going to just get better and fix everything, or if they're going to bring in more players who are roughly as good but have been performing well recently. We're coming up on time here, but I at least want to get in the Boston Red Sox, who are the last team within 3 games. They're sitting 2.5 games back, 2 games under 500. In a sense, they're already sellers, though, but I'm not sure.
They could really use a power-hitting first baseman, I would say.
Yeah, I wonder if they could acquire Rafael Devers and convince him to switch positions. But would you take that trade as a sign that the Red Sox are giving up on the season? Because it didn't really seem like it was sold that way.
I have no idea. It's such a... And look, maybe you take them at face value and it truly does supersede what is happening in 2025. Like it's clear this particular front office group, which wasn't necessarily responsible for that contract he signed. Like they didn't want that contract, and they saw an opportunity to get rid of it. They saw an opportunity to open up playing time for Roman Anthony. But I just don't. I don't understand what their path is. I don't understand what they're attempting to do. And the results have been awful since that trade. I think they have I saw today they have 54 WRC plus since that trade. A lot of those, I don't think they played a home game in that span of time, or they haven't played a home game since the start of that Giants series. They've been on a long road trip. So maybe there's a little bit of like tough luck in there. I know Roman Anthony in particular has like a -7 BABIP at this point. So tough luck has definitely been following him around despite like an amazing barrel rate and all that kind of stuff. But I don't know. I mean, even prior to the trade, they really like Abraham Toro's been nice for them, but I wouldn't say that's a name I trust to sustain the level of production he's had so far. So I don't know. It looks pretty bleak to me. Their rotation, aside from Garrett Crochet, has been exceedingly underwhelming. Like, just Walker Buehler's looked terrible since coming back from the IL. I think we're at a point where we can probably I don't want to say close the book on Lucas Giolito, but it does not look good. So yeah, I just don't know where they go from here. I almost think it's a situation where they might look at this roster and go, there are too many holes for us to fill. The fan base is already mad at us. They already think we've given up. So why pretend we haven't? Now, a mini winning streak could change all that. It is Boston, but I'm just pretty pessimistic about this team right now.
Yeah, and speaking of that rotation, there was also news yesterday that Cutter Crawford needs season-ending wrist surgery, somebody who could have helped the team in the second half.
I feel confident he will not be coming back this season.
Yes, I think we can say yes with that one. Somebody who I drafted in a bunch of gladiator leagues before there was any news that he was hurt at all, and I'm going to get a big fat 0. But unfortunate there. A lesson to spread out your 7th starter if you're doing any draft and hold leagues next winter. If the Red Sox choose to add, maybe it's in the rotation, although they did just acquire Hicks and Harrison. Maybe those are their additions. It could be first base, but Abraham Toro hasn't actually been the problem. If they choose to sell, though, Aroldis Chapman suddenly becomes the most interesting reliever on the market. He's been probably the one biggest pleasant surprise. Well, Carlos Narvaez behind the plate as well probably also deserves a shout out if we're talking pleasant surprises here. Chapman, though, wherever he goes, I would imagine he's going to continue to close, so I wouldn't be afraid of his fantasy value dropping off. He somehow has the best walk rate of his career at 7.9% this season, without really losing any strikeouts. A 38% strikeout rate is very Aroldis Chapman-esque, has helped him to a 1.36 ERA and 0.82 whip. But reasonably likely to get dealt, I would think, unless the Red Sox really do make a run.
Yeah, seems like, I mean, hey, we put 2 and 2 together for our last two topics. Like, the last time the Rangers traded for Aroldis Chapman at deadline, they won the World Series. They also traded Cole Reagans, but, give and take.
Well, is there any other soon-to-be an ace in their minor league system or in their bullpen who they can deal to the Red Sox? I guess we'll find out. But that's just about time here. Do you have any thoughts on the Twins and Royals who are hanging around 3.5, 4 games back, or even say the Orioles who aren't in it really, but at 7.5 games back and with the talented roster? I mean, if they were to go on, an 8 to 10 game winning streak, suddenly I don't know if they can sell. Do you see those teams as being almost out of it, or do you think they're very much all still in it, at least the first two?
I would say, even coming into this season, I was expecting, I was taking Royals unders across the board. The hitting just wasn't there. Like maybe Jack Caglione really finds himself in the second half, and I know he's done some great things the last week or so. But even if you add him in and say he's an above average bat in his rookie season, like it's just not enough. They can't hit. And Bobby Witt Jr. has been amazing. Like, I don't want to degrade him in any way, but he has to be so much better than he's been this season. He has to be the 2024 version of himself at all times to make this team function. And then Cole Reagans goes down with what seems like a pretty long-term injury. Like it just seems to be kind of stacking up against them, which is unfortunate because this is a team that if they had somehow gotten into the playoffs and you're staring down a Cole Reagans, Chris Bubik, Seth Lugo, 1, 2, 3, kind of terrifying. Twins, probably not enough pitching for me. Sort of in a similar vein, like the Rays, a team that really does utilize platoons, but not a lot of bats to fear. Carlos Correa has just been a massive, massive contract blunder at this point, I would say. And the Orioles, I just think they dug themselves too deep a hole. And at this point, they're going to be inclined to trade the Cedric Mullins and the Ryan O'Hearns of the world. Like, maybe if they had a little bit more of a runway, they could possibly bring themselves back to a place where this gets close. But, to kind of finish off the theme of this episode, pitchers who you've been holding for a while in your IL spot that might not come back. Grayson Rodriguez doesn't seem like if he pitches this season, and he says he wants to, it'll probably be September. So there's just not a lot of reinforcements coming for them.
Yeah, if the Orioles somehow did manage to go on that run with their current rotation, they could have Rodriguez, they could have Tyler Wells, they could have Kyle Bradish. I mean, you could see the team that they thought they were going to have. And this could be a team that wins, 25 more games next year than they win this year. I'm not really down on them for the future. The core is still there. If they just add a little bit more pitching and they turn a couple of pieces into a few additional prospects that they can maybe flip again at next year's deadline when they're good again. I wouldn't be down on them long term, but it is not looking very positive for them at all right now. But this was a positive way to spend the last 68 minutes or so. Thank you very much, Garion, for hanging out and talking some AL wildcards. Do you want to leave this with a prediction? If you could say right now which 3 teams are going to win the AL wildcard, is it going to be the Rays, Jays, and Mariners who are currently in there? Or do you think one of the teams will sneak in?
I hate ever picking my team to do well. I do think it's going to be those 3. I think they separate themselves in the end. I think the Yankees probably end up hanging on. I think the Rays' lopsided schedule probably catches up with them a little bit, so they don't catch the Yankees. But those 3, just as you kind of go through it and you pinpoint the holes that some of these other teams have, those seem to be the most complete at least the Rays and the Jays probably the most complete rosters of this group, and then the Mariners rotation at full strength or even close to full strength. This just seems like too much to possibly screw up.
Yeah, as long as they can get close-ish to full strength, I would believe that one for sure. But that's going to do it for today's show. Always great to talk to you, Gary. And maybe next time we can talk about the late 90s Blue Jays that got you and I both into baseball. Some Dave Berg, Homer Bush, Chris Woodward, all the big names. Frank Catalanato, Reed
Brad
Johnson.
Fulmer. Oh, a little Frank Catalanato, Reed Johnson platoon. Oh.
Josh Phelps. Yeah, let's remember some guys next time. But if people want to find your work, where would they find it?
Yeah, Twitter or X or whatever we're calling it now, just at Garion Thorne. And check out DraftKings Network. All my stuff over there for DFS and betting. Have you covered for pretty much every day during the week if you guys want to explore those avenues. So dknetwork.com.
All right. Thank you, Gary. And thanks to everybody who hung out in the chat. And thank you to our sponsor, the NFFC. Remember, you can sign up for the RotoWire Fantasy Football Online Championship. Also, remember, you could use code YouTube15 for 15% off a subscription to rotowire.com. The podcast will be back tomorrow, Todd and Clay, with 2 start pitchers.